Prince Harry's court battle against the Daily Mail just took its wildest turn yet. A witness who's supposed to testify next week says he got a death threat from Harry's own legal team. And the recording he provided? Some people say it's his own voice pretending to be threatened. This isn't your typical courtroom drama anymore. We're talking about forged signatures, mysterious voice messages, witnesses hiding in foreign countries, and accusations flying in every direction. The entire case might be falling apart, and what it reveals about how this whole thing was put together is absolutely stunning. This situation didn't come out of nowhere. For years now, Harry's been waging war against British tabloids, and this particular lawsuit against Associated Newspapers, that's the company behind the Daily Mail, has been building since 2021. The lawsuit is massive. We're not just talking about Harry here. Elton John, his husband David Furnish, actress Elizabeth Hurley, Sadie Frost, politician Simon Hughes, and Doreen Lawrence, Stephen Lawrence's mother. They're all part of this case. Together, they claim the Daily Mail hired private investigators to do seriously illegal stuff. Phone hacking, placing listening devices inside cars, stealing private information through deception, intercepting phone conversations. The whole 9 yards. The case was supposed to be straightforward. These celebrities and public figures were victims of tabloid criminality. They had witnesses who'd done the dirty work and were now ready to confess everything. One of those key witnesses was Gavin Burrows, a private investigator who initially signed a statement in 2021 claiming he'd done hundreds of illegal jobs for the Mail between 2000 and 2005. His confession was huge. He said he'd hacked phones, bugged cars, and targeted tons of people including Harry, Elton John, David Furnish, Hurley, and Frost. That statement convinced several of these claimants, especially Doreen Lawrence, to join Harry's lawsuit. But then everything started unraveling. Last November, Burrows completely changed his story. He came forward saying his signature on that 2021 witness statement was forged. He called the entire document false, complete rubbish, a total fantasy. He said he never did any of this illegal work for Associated Newspapers, and someone had fabricated the whole thing without his knowledge. Can you imagine? The cornerstone witness in a multi-million-pound lawsuit suddenly saying his confession was fake and his signature was forged. Harry's legal team didn't take this well. They needed Burrows to testify, even if he was now contradicting everything he'd previously said. So they summoned him to appear in court as a witness. The trial's set to begin in mid-January 2026, and Burrows was scheduled to give evidence next week via video link. Here's where things get really complicated. Burrows is currently abroad somewhere, and he won't tell Harry's lawyers where he is. He says he's afraid for his safety. And now, in an absolutely explosive development, he's claiming that Graham Johnson, one of the researchers working for Harry's legal team, sent him a death threat. Let's pause and talk about Graham Johnson because his background is pretty important here. Johnson's a former tabloid journalist who used to work for the Sunday Mirror. Back in his journalism days, he admitted to phone hacking and was actually convicted for it in 2014. Since then, he's repositioned himself as someone who exposes media criminality. He runs a website called Byline Investigates with another convicted phone hacker, publishes books about tabloid scandals through his company Yellow Press, and, crucially, works as a paid legal researcher for hacking cases against newspapers. He's been earning about $160 per hour, helping assemble evidence for Harry's various lawsuits against the press. Now here's where this whole death threat allegation comes in. Burrows told the court he received a threatening voice message from Johnson and actually provided a recording of it as evidence. But almost immediately, another legal researcher named Dan Waddell disputed the claim. Waddell examined the recording and said the voice wasn't Graham Johnson's at all. He said it was Gavin Burrows himself, so we've got a witness claiming he received a death threat, providing audio evidence, and then being accused of faking that evidence by recording his own voice, pretending to be the person supposedly threatening him. This gets even messier when you learn about the history between Burrows and Johnson. Back in March 2022, these two had a major falling out over money. Court documents reveal that Burrows allegedly called Johnson twice with threatening phone calls about a payment dispute. Then Burrows supposedly showed up at Johnson's house while drunk, verbally threatened him, and physically shoved him in the street while Johnson's partner and kids were inside the house. Johnson reported this to police. The two men eventually reached some kind of out-of-court settlement after all that. So there's definitely bad blood between them going way back. David Sherborne, that's Harry's main barrister in this case, is not having any of Burrows' claims right now. Sherborne told the court that Burrows is holding everyone to ransom and shouldn't be allowed to testify at all. He said Burrows' safety fears are utterly spurious, completely fake. Sherborne's basically arguing that Burrows is making up this death threat story as an excuse to avoid testifying because he knows his previous false statement has destroyed his credibility, and by refusing to disclose his location while demanding to testify remotely, Burrows is manipulating the court system. But Associated Newspapers, the Daily Mail's publisher, sees this very differently. Their lawyer, Anthony White, pushed back hard. White said there's no dispute about how important Burrows' evidence is to this case. Despite all the chaos around this witness, Associated Newspapers wants him to testify as planned. They're arguing that excluding Burrows would be unjustified given how central his testimony is to the entire lawsuit. This makes strategic sense if you think about it. If Burrows gets on the stand and admits his original confession was false and forged, that seriously damages Harry's case. It shows the evidence against Associated Newspapers isn't solid. The judge now faces an incredibly difficult decision. Does he let Burrows testify remotely from his secret location abroad? Does he force Burrows to reveal where he is and appear in person? Or does he exclude Burrows' testimony entirely? Each option has huge implications for this case. If Burrows doesn't testify, Associated Newspapers loses a chance to discredit Harry's evidence. If Burrows does testify and repeats that his confession was forged, Harry's case takes a massive hit. This death threat controversy is exposing deeper problems with how Harry's legal team has been building their case. Court documents that have been disclosed as part of pretrial battles show some pretty questionable tactics. We're learning that Harry's three-person research team, led by Graham Johnson, along with Dr. Evan Harris and another researcher, has been paying significant amounts of money to witnesses. Johnson wrote in one memo back in 2016 that new funding allowed him to pay my team of 10 whistleblowers and researchers, including the acquisition of evidence. Burrows himself was paid tens of thousands by this team before he turned against them. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Burrows claims that Johnson's team told him privacy lawsuits going back 20 years are hard for newspapers to defend because so much evidence has been destroyed over time. Someone on the team allegedly called it the perfect scam and a gravy train. If that's true, it suggests the researchers were approaching this not as a genuine effort to expose wrongdoing, but as a lucrative money-making scheme. Now, we should be careful here. These are Burrows' allegations, and he's already admitted to lying before. But the fact that he's making these claims in sworn court documents is significant. There's also the issue of Graham Johnson's multiple roles blurring together. He's working as a paid legal researcher, but he's also running Byline Investigates, where he publishes stories about the very cases he's researching. He's publishing books about these scandals through Yellow Press. Some of the witnesses he's paying for legal testimony are also sources for his journalism and subjects of his books. Legal experts have pointed out that this creates obvious conflicts of interest. When someone's income depends on keeping these cases going, through research fees, book deals, and website traffic, how objective can they really be? Let's talk about what this means for the most serious allegations in Harry's case. One of the most shocking claims involves Doreen Lawrence. Her son Stephen was murdered in a racist attack 30 years ago, and the Daily Mail famously campaigned to bring his killers to justice. Now Lawrence is claiming the Mail had her home burgled and her personal information stolen. That's an incredibly serious accusation. But court documents suggest this allegation relies heavily on testimony that may not hold up. Remember, Burroughs' original statement was key to convincing Lawrence to join this lawsuit in the first place. He later said he felt very sorry for Baroness Lawrence, as it appeared to me that she had been duped into pursuing a claim on the basis of false information. Another witness causing problems is Christine Hart, a private investigator who features prominently in several of the claims. During recent testimony, Dr. Evan Harris, one of Harry's researchers, described Hart as a fantasist with an obsession with Hugh Grant. Harris told the court Hart was extremely difficult and hardly a trusted source. Hart has made various claims about being offered money, being provided with a lake house to rent, and being taken out for meals and drinks by the research team. Harris denied most of this, but it paints a picture of witness management that looks more like tabloid tactics than legitimate legal investigation. The costs of this case are staggering. Estimates suggest both sides combined will spend around $40 million if the trial goes ahead for its planned 9 weeks. That's an extraordinary amount of money riding on witnesses whose credibility is now deeply questionable. Associated Newspapers has argued throughout the pre-trial battles that the evidence against them doesn't add up. Their lawyer pointed out that they're not a corner shop. They're a major publisher with proper auditing. Auditors would notice if $3 million was being spent on hiring private investigators for illegal activity. The company has vehemently denied all these preposterous allegations from the start. This is Harry's third major legal showdown with British tabloids. He successfully sued Mirror Group newspapers and received damages. He got an admission of unlawful activities and a settlement from News Group newspapers, the publisher of The Sun. But this case against the Daily Mail is looking far shakier than those previous victories. The difference? Those earlier cases had stronger evidence and more stable witnesses. This one is falling apart before it even gets to trial. What's at stake for Harry personally goes beyond money. His entire public identity over the past several years has been built around being a victim of media intrusion and fighting against tabloid criminality. He's made this his crusade. He and Meghan have repeatedly cited press harassment as a major reason for leaving the UK and stepping back from royal duties. Harry's written about media abuse in his memoir. He's given interviews about it. He's testified in court about it. If this case collapses because the evidence was fabricated or exaggerated, it raises serious questions about all his other claims. The timing couldn't be worse for Harry either. He's been trying to rebuild some bridges with the royal family. There have been hints of possible reconciliation with his father, King Charles, and his brother, William. But this case keeps him in an adversarial position with the British press, which makes reconciliation harder. If the case falls apart dramatically, it could embarrass him publicly and make any family reconciliation even more difficult. Royal commentators have suggested Harry's judgment is on trial here, just as much as Associated Newspapers' alleged behavior. There's also the question of what happens if Harry loses. Beyond the financial costs, which he can probably afford, there's the reputational damage. Critics who've accused him of hypocrisy would have ammunition. They'd point out that while Harry claims to be fighting media misconduct, his own legal team allegedly used questionable tactics like paying witnesses large sums and possibly exaggerating or fabricating evidence. Supporters of Harry would argue that even if some witnesses have problems, that doesn't mean the underlying allegations aren't true. They'd say the tabloids have a long documented history of illegal behavior. From Associated Newspapers' perspective, this case represents an existential threat. If they lose, it validates decades of allegations about systematic criminality. It could open the floodgates to more lawsuits. It would seriously damage their reputation. But if they win, especially if they win because Harry's evidence falls apart, it vindicates them and discredits their accusers. They can argue they've been the victims of a coordinated campaign based on false testimony from paid witnesses. The judge overseeing this case has to navigate incredibly complex issues. He's got to weigh whether Burroughs should be allowed to testify despite all the problems with his credibility. He's got to consider whether the alleged death threat is real or fabricated. He's got to decide if the research team's payment of witnesses taints the evidence. He's got to evaluate whether the blurring of Johnson's various roles as journalist, researcher, and book publisher creates insurmountable conflicts of interest. These aren't easy calls. Voice analysis of that alleged death threat recording could be crucial. If independent experts confirm it's Burroughs' own voice, that completely destroys his credibility and raises questions about what else he's willing to fabricate. If it really is Graham Johnson's voice, that's a bombshell that could torpedo Harry's entire case by showing his team engaged in witness intimidation. If it's inconclusive, or if it's some third person's voice, then we're left with even more confusion. What's fascinating is how this has turned into a battle of former tabloid insiders. Graham Johnson is a convicted phone hacker now working against the tabloids. Various private investigators who once did dodgy work for newspapers are now either testifying for or against those same newspapers. Everyone's got complicated histories and mixed motives. Nobody comes into this with completely clean hands. It's like watching a civil war between people who all participated in the same system and are now pointing fingers at each other. The broader implications for press freedom are significant. If Harry and the other claimants win despite the questionable evidence, it sets a precedent that could make newspapers extremely vulnerable to lawsuits based on paid witness testimony. If Associated Newspapers wins, it might embolden tabloids and make future victims less likely to come forward. The outcome affects how we balance privacy rights against press freedom, how we view historic media practices, and what standards of evidence should apply in these civil cases. For the public watching this unfold, it's pretty disillusioning. Many people initially sympathized with Harry's claims about media harassment. The phone hacking scandal was real. Newspapers did engage in illegal information gathering. Lives were ruined. But when you see how the sausage is being made in this particular case, witnesses changing stories, signatures allegedly forged, death threats that might be self-recorded, researchers paying witnesses tens of thousands while calling it a gravy train, it's hard to know what to believe. Trust erodes on all sides. The trial is supposed to start in mid-January and run for 9 weeks. That's an enormous amount of time in court, with both sides presenting their evidence and cross-examining witnesses. If Burroughs does end up testifying, his cross-examination will be absolutely brutal. Associated Newspapers lawyers will go through every inconsistency in his statements, every payment he received, every interaction with the research team, and that alleged death threat in excruciating detail. It won't be pretty. Harry himself is expected to testify and be cross-examined. That'll be fascinating to watch. He'll have to defend his decision to bring this case, explain his relationship with the research team, address the witness credibility problems, and stand by his allegations despite all the issues that have emerged. Associated Newspapers will try to paint him as someone on a vendetta against the press who's willing to rely on questionable evidence to pursue his crusade. Harry's lawyers will argue he's a legitimate victim seeking justice against an organization that systematically violated people's privacy. The next week is crucial. The court needs to decide whether Burroughs can testify remotely, whether voice analysis will be done on that recording, and whether other disputed witness testimony will be allowed. These pretrial rulings could determine the whole outcome. If key witnesses are excluded, Harry's case weakens significantly. If they're all allowed to testify despite the credibility problems, Associated Newspapers faces tougher odds, but has more opportunities to discredit the evidence during cross-examination. Whatever happens, this case has already damaged Harry's reputation as a crusader against media wrongdoing. Even if he ultimately wins, the revelations about how his legal team operated will linger. The paying of witnesses, the multiple roles of Graham Johnson, the fabricated or forged statements, the alleged death threat, all of this creates an impression that this wasn't a clean, principled fight for justice. It looks messy and questionable. That's not what Harry wanted. For British tabloids, this represents both danger and opportunity. If Associated Newspapers loses, it confirms the worst perceptions about tabloid behavior and could trigger massive financial liability across the industry. If they win, It gives them ammunition to fight back against accusations they've been dealing with for years. It lets them claim they're the real victims of a smear campaign orchestrated by celebrities with unlimited resources and questionable motives. The legal profession is watching closely too. The tactics used by Harry's research team, the payments to witnesses, the journalist-researcher-publisher conflicts of interest, the witness management strategies, are all being scrutinized. If this becomes a model for future privacy litigation, it could transform how these cases are built. Or courts might decide these tactics are inappropriate and set stricter boundaries around paid witnesses and researcher conduct. There's something deeply ironic about this whole situation. Harry's lawsuit accuses tabloids of using private investigators who engaged in illegal and unethical behavior to get stories. But his own legal team employed private investigators and researchers whose behavior is now being questioned. They paid witnesses large sums. They allegedly threatened people. They mixed journalism with legal work. The very tactics Harry condemns are being mirrored, at least to some degree, by his own side. None of this answers the fundamental question at the heart of the case. Did Associated Newspapers systematically engage in phone hacking, bugging, and other illegal information gathering? That's what this trial is supposed to determine. But the question's been obscured by all this controversy about how the evidence was assembled and whether the witnesses are credible. Even if newspapers did engage in wrongdoing 20 years ago, proving it now with questionable witnesses and disputed evidence is turning out to be nearly impossible. So where does this leave us? A major trial is about to start with a key witness who says he was threatened, but might have recorded the threat himself. Witnesses are changing their stories. Signatures are disputed. Payments are controversial. Motives are questioned. Both sides are deeply flawed. The truth feels more elusive than ever. And hanging over everything is the question of whether justice can actually be served when evidence is this compromised and witnesses are this unreliable. The death threat allegation, whether real or fabricated, might end up being the detail that defines this entire case. Not because it's the most important issue legally, but because it perfectly captures the chaos and credibility crisis that's consumed this litigation. When you can't even determine if a death threat is real or if a witness recorded his own voice to frame someone, how can you expect a court to reliably determine what happened with phone hacking and privacy violations 2 decades ago? For viewers following this story, the takeaway is clear. Royal drama and tabloid wars make for compelling headlines, but the reality is incredibly messy. There are no clear heroes or villains here. Just flawed people with mixed motives, fighting expensive battles where truth has become almost impossible to untangle from manipulation, self-interest, and revenge. Prince Harry wanted to take down the Daily Mail and expose tabloid criminality. Instead, he might end up exposing the questionable methods used to build his own case. The next few weeks will tell us whether this trial actually happens as planned or whether the whole thing collapses under the weight of all these credibility problems. Will Burroughs testify? Will that voice recording be analyzed? Will other witnesses hold up under cross-examination? Will the judge exclude testimony based on these issues? Every decision will have massive consequences for Harry, for Associated Newspapers, for the other claimants, and for future press freedom battles. What do you think about all this? Does Harry still deserve support despite the problems with his witnesses? Is Associated Newspapers being unfairly attacked, or do they deserve whatever comes their way? Are both sides equally guilty of playing dirty? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more coverage as this trial unfolds. This story's far from over, and it's only going to get more intense when everyone actually gets into court next week. I'll be following every development and breaking down what it means. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.